The Intergalactic Misadventures of Captain Quark. It was a dark and stormy night on the planet Zorbax Prime. Captain Quark, the roguish commander of the starship Nebula Blaster, was in his quarters, nursing a glass of Aldebaran whiskey. His crew had just barely escaped with their lives from a fierce battle with the evil Lord Xylith and his army of mutant space pirates. "Curse that scoundrel Xylith," Quark growled, taking a long sip. "If only I could find a way to finally defeat him and restore peace to the Milky Way galaxy." Suddenly, his first officer Ensign Zora burst through the door, her eyes wide with urgency. "Captain, we've just received an emergency distress call from the colony on Cygnus 7. They're under attack by Xylith's forces." Quark slammed down his glass, determination etched on his rugged features. "Then what are we waiting for? Set a course for Cygnus 7, maximum warp. This is our chance to put an end to Xylith's reign of terror once and for all." The Nebula Blaster shot through the inky blackness of space, racing against time to reach the beleaguered colony. As they approached, Quark could see massive explosions rocking the surface. "Ensign, ready the photon torpedoes and plasma cannons. This is going to be one hell of a fight." What followed was an epic battle of ships weaving through asteroid fields, weapons fire lighting up the void, and the Nebula Blaster's crew utilizing every ounce of their skill and courage to fend off the invading pirates. Just when all seemed lost, Quark had a moment of brilliance. "Helm, target the main reactor on Xylith's flagship. If we can take that out, it might just cripple his entire armada." A single well-placed shot from the Nebula Blaster's main cannon struck true, causing a massive chain reaction that tore Xylith's flagship apart in a spectacular explosion. The surviving pirates immediately turned and fled in disarray. The colony was saved, and the grateful colonists cheered as Quark and his crew disembarked to thunderous applause. But the captain knew their troubles were far from over. Xylith was still out there, and he would surely be back for revenge. Quark turned to his first officer with a wry grin. "Well, Zora, looks like our intergalactic misadventures are just getting started." After their victory on Cygnus 7, the crew of the Nebula Blaster had a brief respite, but they knew it wouldn't be long before Lord Xylith struck back. Sure enough, reports began filtering in of Xylith's forces raiding colonies and outposts across the Milky Way. "We have to stop him before he can consolidate his power," Quark declared during a tense strategy meeting. "But his fleet is vast, and his resources seem limitless. How can we possibly defeat him?" Ensign Zora chimed in. "Perhaps we need to go on the offensive, Captain. Find a way to cripple Xylith's operation at the source." "Exactly what I was thinking," Quark replied with a grin. "And I think I know just the place to start the notorious pirate haven of Tortuga Station." The Nebula Blaster made a perilous journey through the lawless Tortuga system, dodging pirate patrols and navigating treacherous asteroid fields. When they finally docked at the massive space station, Quark assembled an away team comprised of himself, Zora, and the ship's chief engineer, the gruff but brilliant Xylith. "All right, listen up, you scruffy-looking nerf herders," Quark bellowed as they made their way through Tortuga's crowded, neon-lit corridors. "Our intel suggests Xylith has been using this station to funnel resources and recruits to his forces. We need to find the central hub and shut it down." After a harrowing series of encounters with Xylith's minions, bar brawls, and narrow escapes, the away team finally located the main control center. "Time to work our magic, Xylith," Quark said, nodding to the engineer. Xylith's nimble fingers danced across the terminal's holographic interface, triggering a cascade of system failures that rippled through Tortuga Station. Alarms blared as the entire facility began to shudder and groan. "That's our cue to leave," Zora shouted, already sprinting back towards the Nebula Blaster's docking bay. Quark and his team made it aboard just as Tortuga Station was rocked by a series of massive explosions, tearing the facility apart. As the Nebula Blaster jumped to warp, Quark turned to his crew with a triumphant grin. "That ought to leave Xylith reeling for a while. But mark my words, he'll be back. And next time, we'll be ready."
With Tortuga Station in ruins and Xylith's operation severely disrupted, Captain Quark and the crew of the Nebula Blaster had a brief moment to catch their breath. But they knew it wouldn't be long before the evil lord struck back with a vengeance. "We've dealt him a serious blow, but Xylith is relentless," Quark mused as he pored over strategic reports with Ensign XORA. "He'll be coming for us, and we need to be ready." XORA nodded grimly. "Agreed. And we can't afford to rest on our laurels. We need to take the fight to him, hit him where it hurts." "Exactly what I was thinking," Quark replied with a wolfish grin. And I think I know just the place to start the remote mining colony of Helix Prime. The Nebula Blaster streaked through hyperspace, arriving at the isolated outpost just as Xylot's forces were launching a devastating assault. Quark wasted no time ordering his crew into battle stations. All hands, this is the captain. Lock and load, people, it's time to show these space scum what the Nebula Blaster is made of. What followed was a chaotic, adrenaline-fueled clash, with the Nebula Blaster's powerful armaments going toe-to-toe with Xylot's invading fleet. Explosions rocked the colony as the two sides traded fire, debris and energy bolts streaking through the inky void. In the heat of the battle, Quark realized they were outmatched and outgunned. Damn it, we need to buy the colonists time to evacuate. Helm, lay in an attack run on that cruiser, we'll take it down with everything we've got. The Nebula Blaster surged forward, its phaser cannons blazing, as Quark gripped the arms of his captain's chair, teeth clenched in determination. Just as they were about to make the kill shot, a massive explosion rocked the ship, sending sparks and smoke billowing through the bridge. "We've taken heavy damage, sir," XORA shouted. "Engines are failing, shields are down to 20, Quark's jaw tightened. Then we'll have to make this count. Load all remaining torpedoes into the forward launchers. Target their bridge and fire everything we've got." In a blinding burst of light and fury, the Nebula Blaster's salvo slammed into the enemy cruiser, gutting it from bow to stern. The crippled vessel drifted helplessly, its crew abandoning ship as it began to break apart. "We did it!" XORA exclaimed. The colony is safe, and Xylot's forces are in full retreat, but Quark's triumph was short-lived. As he surveyed the damage to his beloved ship, he knew their struggles were far from over. "Set a course for the nearest starbase, Ensign," he said wearily. "Looks like we've got some repairs to make, but mark my words, Xyloth will pay for this. One way or another, I'll see that monster brought to justice." With the Nebula Blaster limping towards the nearest starbase for critical repairs, Captain Quark and his crew had a brief moment to catch their breath, but they knew the respite would be short-lived. "Xyloth is licking his wounds, but it's only a matter of time before he strikes back," Quark said grimly, poring over the damage reports with Ensign XORA. "We need to be ready." XORA nodded in agreement. "Agreed, Captain. Once the Nebula Blaster is spaceworthy again, we'll need to go on the offensive. Any ideas where to hit Xyloth next?" Quark stroked his chin, eyes narrowed in concentration. "I've been thinking about that. Our intelligence indicates Xyloth has been using a remote research facility on the planet Zirion as a staging ground for his operations. If we can disable that facility, it would be a major blow to his plans." "Zirion, huh?" XORA mused. "Isn't that the planet with the dense, toxic atmosphere and deadly predators?" "The very same," Quark replied with a wry grin. "But I've never let a little thing like death traps and hostile environments stop me before. Besides, we'll have the element of surprise on our side." As soon as the Nebula Blaster's repairs were complete, Quark wasted no time in setting a course for Zirion. The journey was treacherous, with the ship navigating through perilous asteroid fields and dodging the planet's erratic weather patterns. "Atmosphere entry in 60 seconds," the Helm officer reported. "Brace for impact." The Nebula Blaster plunged into Zirion's roiling, noxious skies, buffeted by howling winds and electrical storms. Quark gripped the arms of his chair, eyes narrowed in concentration. "There it is," he said, pointing to a blip on the view screen. "The research facility. All ahead full, Helm. And tell the away team to suit up, we're going in." Quark, XORA, and a small squad of heavily armed Marines descended to the surface, their protective suits shielding them from the planet's deadly environment. They moved stealthily through the tangled, alien landscape until finally reaching the towering walls of the research facility. "All right, listen up," Quark whispered into his comms. "We need to disable that facility's primary power grid. XORA, you take your team and find the access point. The rest of you, with me, we're going to create a distraction."
What followed was a harrowing, high-stakes infiltration, with Quark's team battling Xyloth's guards while Zora's squad worked to cripple the facility's defenses. The sounds of phaser fire and explosions echoed across the alien landscape as the Nebula Blaster crew fought for their lives. Finally, with a triumphant shout, Zora reported that the power grid was offline. "Mission accomplished, Captain. Now let's get the hell out of here." As the away team raced back to the Nebula Blaster, the research facility erupted in a series of catastrophic power failures and cascading system overloads. Quark allowed himself a grim smile, knowing that Xylith had once again been dealt a serious blow. "Helm, get us out of here." "Maximum warp," he ordered. "Our work here is done. But mark my words, Xylith will rue the day he crossed Captain Quark and the Nebula Blaster."
With the Nebula Blaster safely away from the rapidly disintegrating Xyrian research facility, Captain Quark gathered his senior staff for a debriefing. "Well, that was a textbook infiltration and sabotage operation, if I do say so myself," Quark said, with a hint of pride. "Xylith's operation on Xyrian is in ruins, and we dealt a serious blow to his plans." Ensign XORA nodded in agreement. "No argument there, Captain. But I get the feeling this is only the calm before the storm. Xyloth isn't going to take this lying down." Quark leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "You're absolutely right, XORA. Which is why we need to start planning our next move. We've disrupted his operations on Tortuga Station, and Xyrian, the question is, where will he strike back?" The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances, mulling over the possibilities. Finally, Lieutenant JAX spoke up. "Sir, our intelligence suggests Xyloth has been amassing forces near the Cygnus Nebula. It could be a staging ground for a major offensive." Quark nodded thoughtfully. "The Cygnus Nebula, eh? That's a strategic choke point. If Xyloth gets a foothold there, he could cut off supply lines and communications across half the quadrant." "Exactly," JAX replied. "We need to get there first and fortify our position before he makes his move." "Then that's exactly what we'll do," Quark declared, standing up and pacing the length of the briefing room. "Helm, set a course for the Cygnus Nebula. Maximum warp. We need to get there as quickly as possible and dig in before Xylith's forces arrive." The Nebula Blaster streaked through the void, its powerful engines propelling it towards the swirling, luminous clouds of the Cygnus Nebula. Quark pored over tactical displays, formulating his battle plan. "All right, listen up," he addressed his crew. "When we arrive, I want sensor sweeps running constantly. The second we detect any sign of Xylith's fleet, I want to know about it. We're going to fortify a defensive position and wait for them to make their move." As the Nebula Blaster entered the nebula, Quark's crew sprang into action, deploying sensor drones, setting up defensive emplacements, and ensuring the ship's systems were at peak readiness. "Captain, we're detecting multiple ships emerging from the nebula's outer edges," XORA reported, her fingers flying across her console. "It's Xylith's forces, just as we predicted." Quark's jaw tightened. "Battle stations, all hands. This is it, people, time to show Xyloth what the Nebula Blaster is made of." The stage was set for a titanic clash, with the heroic crew of the Nebula Blaster standing firm against the overwhelming might of Xylith's armada. The fate of the sector hung in the balance as the two forces converged, ready to engage in a battle that would echo through the annals of history. The Nebula Blaster's sensors detected Xylith's fleet emerging from the swirling clouds of the Cygnus Nebula, their massive warships bristling with firepower. Captain Quark steeled himself, knowing that the fate of the sector rested on the shoulders of his crew. "All hands, this is the captain. Battle stations, ready all weapons and shield systems. We're about to have company." Quark's voice was calm and steady, betraying none of the tension he felt. The Nebula Blaster's crew sprang into action, the bridge a hive of activity as they prepared for the impending onslaught. Ensign Xora's fingers danced across her console, fine-tuning the ship's defensive systems. "Captain, Xylith's fleet is closing in fast. They're powering up their main guns." Xora's voice was tense, but her movements remained precise and efficient. "Helm, evasive maneuvers. Weapons, target their lead ships and fire everything we've got." Quark commanded, his eyes locked on the view screen as the enemy vessels surged towards them. The Nebula Blaster's powerful phaser banks and torpedo launchers unleashed a withering barrage, the brilliant bolts of energy lancing out and striking the enemy ships with devastating effect. But Xylith's forces were numerous and determined, returning fire with equal ferocity. The two fleets collided in a spectacular display of firepower, the staccato of weapons fire and the rumble of exploding hulls filling the bridge. Quark gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white, as he directed his crew's efforts. "Shields down to 65% and falling," XORA shouted, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We can't take much more of this, Captain." Quark's mind raced, searching for a way to turn the tide of the battle. "Helm, bring us around for another pass. Weapons, target their engines and shield generators. We need to cripple their mobility and defenses. The Nebula Blaster swooped in, its guns blazing, as it executed a series of daring maneuvers. Xylot's ships were caught off guard, their shields and propulsion systems sustaining heavy damage. "Yes, that's it," Quark exclaimed, a grin spreading across his face. "Keep up the pressure, people. We're breaking through." With Xylot's fleet now reeling, the Nebula Blaster pressed its advantage, pummeling the enemy vessels with everything they had. Explosions rocked the enemy ships, and one by one, they began to fall back, their retreat hastened by the relentless onslaught. Quark leaned back in his chair, a triumphant look on his face. "That's right, Xyloth." With Xylot's fleet in full retreat, the Nebula Blaster limped towards the nearest Federation starbase, its systems battered but still functional. Captain Quark paced the bridge, his expression a mix of relief and determination. "Damage report, XORA," he said, turning to his young science officer. Sora's fingers flew across her console as she collated the data. "Shields are down to 40%, hull integrity at 75%. We've sustained moderate damage to our main phaser banks and a few minor system malfunctions, but overall we're in decent shape considering the beating we took." Quark nodded grimly. "Good. We'll need to get those systems repaired and restocked before we can go after Xyloth again." He paused, his brow furrowing in thought. "Speaking of which, what's the latest on his fleet's movements? According to our last sensor sweeps, Xylot's ships have retreated deep into the Cygnus Nebula," XORA replied. "It looks like they're regrouping and consolidating their forces. I estimate it'll take them at least a week to become combat ready again." "A week, eh?" Quark stroked his chin, a hint of a smile forming on his lips. "Perfect. That should give us enough time to resupply and come up with a plan to finish them off once and for all." The Nebula Blaster docked at the starbase, its weary crew disembarking to receive much-needed R&R. Quark, however, remained on board, poring over star charts and intelligence reports. "All right, people, listen up," he said, as his senior staff assembled in the briefing room. "Xylot's fleet is still licking its wounds, but we know it's only a matter of time before they come at us again. This time, we're going to hit them where it hurts." Quark's fingers danced across the holographic display, highlighting a key system within the Cygnus Nebula. "Our intel suggests that Xyloth has been using a secret base in the Cygnus Nebula as a staging ground for his operations. If we can strike at that base and cripple his supply lines, it'll severely hamper his ability to mount a counterattack." JAX, the Nebula Blaster's tactical officer, leaned forward, his eyes narrowed in thought. "It's a risky plan, Captain. Xylot's forces will be on high alert, and the base is bound to be heavily fortified." Quark nodded. "I know, JAX. That's why we're going to need to hit them hard and fast. We'll need to carefully coordinate our attack and time it perfectly to catch them off guard." The briefing continued, with the crew hashing out the details of their plan. As they finalized their strategy, a sense of determination and purpose filled the room. They were ready to take the fight to Xyloth and put an end to his ambitions once and for all. "All right, people, let's get to it," Quark said, his voice filled with resolve. "The Nebula Blaster is going to pay Xyloth a little visit, and this time, we're not leaving until the job is done." The Nebula Blaster's engines roared to life as the Federation starship surged back into the Cygnus Nebula, its crew primed for a decisive confrontation with Xylot's forces. Captain Quark stood on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the swirling clouds of the nebula. "Helm, take us in slowly and engage the stealth systems," he ordered, his voice calm and measured. "We can't afford to tip our hand too early." The Nebula Blaster glided silently through the dense gases of the nebula, its sensors sweeping the area for any sign of the enemy. XORA, the ship's science officer, monitored the readouts intently. "Captain, I'm detecting a large concentration of energy readings in a nearby star system," she reported, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's got to be Xylot's base." Quark nodded, his expression grim. "Plot an intercept course, but keep us at maximum stealth. We need to get as close as possible before they detect us." The Nebula Blaster crept forward, its powerful engines barely registering a whisper as it closed in on the enemy stronghold. JAX, the tactical officer, kept a close eye on the sensor readings. "Shields are at full power, all weapons systems are armed and ready," he reported. "We're in position and awaiting your orders, Captain." Quark took a deep breath, his mind racing as he weighed his options. "All right, here's the plan. JAX, I want you to target the base's primary power systems and shield generators. XORA, coordinate with engineering to fire a concentrated burst of tachyon radiation to disrupt their communications. Helm, be ready to execute a high-speed strafing run once we've softened their defenses. The crew snapped to attention, their fingers flying across their consoles as they carried out Quark's orders. The Nebula Blaster's phasers and torpedoes lashed out, striking the enemy base with pinpoint accuracy. Xylot's forces scrambled to respond, but their efforts were hampered by the disruption of their communications and the loss of their primary power sources. Now Helm, Quark barked, and the Nebula Blaster surged forward, its phaser banks and torpedo launchers blazing. The enemy base was caught off guard, its defenses crumbling under the relentless assault. Explosions rocked the Cygnus Nebula as the Nebula Blaster unleashed its full fury, reducing Xylot's base to a burning ruin. The enemy ships, now cut off from their supply lines and reinforcements, were forced to retreat in disarray. Quark watched the spectacle with grim satisfaction, his fists clenched tightly. "That's right, Xyloth," he murmured. "Run back to whatever hole you crawled out of. The Nebula Blaster has just delivered a message you won't soon forget." As the enemy fleet fled, the Nebula Blaster's crew let out a cheer, their spirits high after the decisive victory. Quark allowed himself a brief smile, knowing that they had dealt a crippling blow to Xylot's ambitions. "Alright, people, let's get out of here before Xyloth decides to come back and try his luck again," he said, his tone authoritative but tinged with a hint of pride. "We've got a job well done, but I have a feeling this isn't the last we've seen of our dear friend Xyloth." With that, the Nebula Blaster turned and set a course for the nearest Federation outpost, its crew brimming with a newfound confidence in their ability to face whatever challenges lay ahead.
As the Nebula Blaster made its way back to the Federation outpost, Captain Quark couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The victory over Xylot's base in the Cygnus Nebula had been a decisive one, but he knew that the scheming Deluvian commander was not one to be taken lightly. Quark paced the bridge, lost in thought. "Extra, what's the latest on Xylot's fleet movements?" he asked. Turning to his science officer, Zora's fingers danced across her console as she sifted through the sensor data. "It looks like Xylot's ships are scattering, retreating in all directions," she reported. "They're regrouping, but it's hard to get a clear fix on their ultimate destination." Quark nodded, his brow furrowed. "That's what I was afraid of. Xylot's the cunning one. He's not going to just sit back and lick his wounds. He's planning something, and I have a feeling we haven't seen the last of him." Jax, the tactical officer, stepped forward. "Sir, I recommend we maintain a high state of readiness and keep a close watch on the surrounding systems. If Xyloth tries to regroup and mount a counterattack, we'll need to be ready to respond." "Agreed," Quark said, "and I want our engineers to work around the clock to get the Nebula Blaster back to full combat readiness. We can't afford to be caught off guard." As the Nebula Blaster approached the Federation outpost, Quark's thoughts turned to the broader implications of their victory. Xylot's ambitions had been a thorn in the side of the Federation for years, and this latest setback would undoubtedly have ripple effects throughout the sector. "Patch me through to Starfleet Command," Quark ordered. "I need to make sure they're aware of the situation and the threat Xyloth still poses." The communication channel crackled to life, and Quark found himself face to face with the stern visage of Admiral Janeway. "Captain Quark, I've been briefed on the situation," she said, her tone serious. "Your actions in the Cygnus Nebula were commendable, but Xyloth is a crafty adversary. We can't afford to let our guard down." Quark nodded. "I understand, Admiral. The Nebula Blaster will remain on high alert, ready to respond to any threat Xyloth may pose, but I have a feeling this isn't the last we'll see of him." Janeway's expression darkened. "I share your concern, Captain. Xyloth's ambitions have been a thorn in the side of the Federation for too long. We'll need to be vigilant and prepared for whatever he has in store."
The communication channel closed, and Quark turned to his crew, his eyes narrowed in determination. "Alright, people, you heard the Admiral. We've got our work cut out for us, but I have no doubt that the Nebula Blaster is up to the task. Let's get this ship back in fighting shape and be ready for whatever Xyloth throws at us next." The Nebula Blaster docked at the Federation outpost, its weary but resolute crew disembarking to begin the necessary repairs and preparations. Quark knew that the battle against Xyloth was far from over, but he was confident that his crew was up to the challenge. As the Nebula Blaster underwent repairs and resupply at the Federation outpost, Captain Quark and his senior staff gathered to discuss their next move. "Alright, people, let's go over what we know," Quark began, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Xyloth's forces have scattered, but we know he's planning something. We need to stay one step ahead of him. XORA, the science officer, stepped forward. Our latest sensor scans indicate that Xylot's ships have been spotted in several different sectors, suggesting he's trying to regroup and rebuild his forces, she reported, but the specific nature of his plans is still unclear. JAX, the tactical officer, leaned forward in his chair. We need to keep a close watch on those sectors and be ready to respond if Xyloth makes a move, he said. I've been working with the engineers to upgrade the Nebula Blaster's weapons and defensive systems. We can't afford to be caught off guard again. Quark nodded, a grim expression on his face. Agreed. And we need to coordinate with Starfleet Command to gather as much intelligence as possible on Xylot's movements and intentions. This isn't just about defending our own interests, the stability of the entire sector is at stake. The meeting continued, with the Nebula Blaster's crew discussing strategies, resource allocation, and contingency plans. As they worked, a sense of determination and camaraderie filled the room. They all knew that the fight against Xyloth would be long and arduous, but they were united in their commitment to protecting the Federation and its citizens. Finally, Quark stood up and addressed his crew. Alright, people, let's get this ship back in fighting shape. We've got a formidable adversary to deal with, but I have every confidence that the Nebula Blaster and her crew are up to the task. Let's show Xyloth that the Federation doesn't back down from a fight. The crew responded with a resounding cheer, their spirits high as they set to work on the necessary repairs and upgrades. Quark watched them with a sense of pride, knowing that he was leading a team of the finest officers in Starfleet. As the Nebula Blaster's engines roared back to life, Quark took his place on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the stars ahead. Alright, Helm, set a course for the Nexus sector. It's time we paid Xyloth a visit. The Nebula Blaster surged forward, its sleek hull cutting through the vastness of space as it embarked on its next mission to confront Xyloth and put an end to his schemes once and for all. As the Nebula Blaster raced towards the Nexus sector, Captain Quark and his crew were filled with a sense of urgency. They knew that Xyloth was a formidable adversary and that the stakes were higher than ever. Alright, XORA, what's the latest on Xylot's movements? Quark asked, his eyes narrowed in concentration. Sora's fingers danced across her console as she scanned the sensor data. It looks like Xylot's forces have been sighted in the Aldebaran system, sir, she reported. Our intelligence suggests they're in the process of establishing a new forward operating base there. Quark's expression darkened. Aldebaran, that's a strategic hub for the Federation. Xyloth must be planning something big. JAX, the tactical officer, stepped forward. Captain, we need to move quickly. If Xyloth manages to secure a foothold in Aldebaran, it could jeopardize our entire defensive posture in this sector. Quark nodded, his mind racing. Alright, Helm, set a course for the Aldebaran system. Maximum warp. And JAX, I want you and your team to start prepping our weapons and defensive systems. We're going to need every advantage we can get. As the Nebula Blaster hurtled through the void of space, the crew worked with a sense of urgency and focus. They knew that the fate of the Federation hung in the balance, and that they couldn't afford to falter. Finally, the Aldebaran system came into view, and Quark's eyes narrowed as he took in the sight of Xylot's forces. JAX, report, he barked. Sensors indicate a significant Diluvian presence in the system, sir, JAX replied, his fingers flying across his console. They've established a heavily fortified base on the fourth planet, and they've got ships patrolling the area. Quark's jaw tightened. Shields up, weapons charged. We're going in. The Nebula Blaster surged forward, its phaser banks blazing as it engaged Xylot's forces. The battle was fierce and intense, with both sides trading blows in a desperate struggle for control of the system. Quark gripped the armrests of his chair, his eyes fixed on the view screen as he watched the unfolding chaos. Come on, Xyloth, show yourself, he muttered under his breath. Suddenly, a massive Diluvian warship emerged from behind the planet, its weapons blazing. There he is! Quark shouted. All hands, prepare for evasive maneuvers. The Nebula Blaster darted and weaved, its agility and firepower giving it an edge against Xylot's larger and more ponderous vessel. But the Diluvian commander was a cunning and ruthless foe, and he was determined to crush the Federation's forces. The battle raged on, with both sides inflicting heavy damage on the other. But as the Nebula Blaster's shields began to falter, Quark knew that they couldn't keep up the fight much longer. JAX, status report. He barked. "Shields at 30%, sir," JAX replied, his face tense. "We're taking heavy fire, and our weapons systems are starting to overload." Quark's jaw tightened. "Divert all available power to the shields and weapons. We're going to have to make a run for it." The Nebula Blaster surged forward, its engines at maximum output as it attempted to break free of Xylot's forces. But the Diluvian commander wasn't about to let his prey escape so easily. "He's in pursuit, sir," JAX shouted. "We're not going to be able to outrun him." Quark's mind raced as he weighed his options. They couldn't take much more punishment, and they couldn't afford to let Xylot's forces gain a foothold in the Aldebaran system. Suddenly, an idea struck him. "JAX, prepare the Nebula Blaster for a jump to warp. I'm going to try something risky." JAX's eyes widened, but he didn't argue. "Aye, sir." Warp engines standing by. Quark gripped the edge of his chair, his knuckles turning white. "Xyloth, you bastard, let's see how you like this." The Nebula Blaster's engines roared to life, and the ship surged forward, its warp bubble slowly forming around it. But just as it was about to make the jump, Quark issued a new order. "Fire the Nebula Blaster's main cannon." A massive beam of energy erupted from the ship's forward weapons, slamming into Xylot's flagship and causing massive damage. Caught off guard, the Diluvian warship was unable to react in time, and it was rocked by a series of devastating explosions. As the Nebula Blaster leapt into warp, Quark allowed himself a small smile. "That'll teach you to underestimate the Federation, Xyloth." But even as the ship raced away, Quark knew that their victory was only a temporary one. Xyloth was still out there, and he would be back. And the next time they faced him, the stakes would be even higher.
As the Nebula Blaster raced away from the Aldebaran system, Captain Quark and his crew were all too aware that their victory over Xyloth was only a temporary reprieve. "That was a close one," Jack said, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I don't know how much longer the Nebula Blaster could have held out." Quark nodded grimly. "Xyloth is a formidable opponent, and he's not going to give up easily. We need to regroup and figure out our next move." Exera, the science officer, stepped forward. "Sir, I've been analyzing the sensor data from our engagement with Xyloth's forces. It appears that they were in the process of establishing a heavily fortified base in the Aldebaran system." Quark's eyes narrowed. "That's exactly what I was afraid of. If Xyloth had managed to secure a foothold there, it would have given him a strategic advantage that could have threatened the entire sector." Jax leaned forward in his chair. "So, what's our next move, Captain? We can't just let Xyloth regroup and try again." Quark paused, considering his options. "We need to gather more intelligence on Xyloth's movements and intentions. Exera, I want you to coordinate with Starfleet Command and see if we can get a better sense of what he's planning." Exera nodded. Sir, I'll get started right away." Quark turned to Jax. "In the meantime, I want you and the engineering team to do a full systems check on the Nebula Blaster. We need to make sure she's in top shape for our next encounter with Xyloth." Jax saluted. "Understood, Captain. We'll have the Nebula Blaster ready to go in no time." As the crew set to work, Quark took a moment to glance out the view screen, his mind racing. He knew that Xyloth was a formidable foe and that the fight to stop him would be long and arduous. But he also knew that the stakes were too high to back down. "Helm, set a course for the nearest Starfleet base," he said. "We need to regroup and plan our next move." The Nebula Blaster surged forward, its warp drive propelling it across the vast expanse of space. Quark leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "Xyloth, you may have gotten the upper hand this time, but I can assure you, we're not done with you yet," he muttered under his breath. "The next time we meet, it'll be on our terms." As the ship raced towards its destination, Quark knew that the fight was far from over. But with his crew by his side, he was confident that they could prevail. They would need to be smarter, stronger, and more determined than ever before, but he was willing to do whatever it took to protect the Federation and its citizens. The Nebula Blaster's engines hummed with power, and Quark felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were in this for the long haul, and they weren't going to back down without a fight.
As the Nebula Blaster continued on its course towards the nearest Starfleet base, the tension on board was palpable. Quark knew that their encounter with Xyloth had been a wake-up call, and that they needed to regroup and reevaluate their strategy if they were going to have any hope of stopping the ambitious Xylith's plans. Exra, the science officer, approached Quark with a grave expression. "Captain, I've been analyzing the sensor data from our battle, and the news isn't good. It appears that Xylith has been amassing a massive fleet of ships, far larger than anything we've seen from him before." Quark's brow furrowed. "How is that possible? Xylith's resources have always been limited compared to the Federation's." Exra shook her head. "That's just it, sir. It seems that Xylith has found a way to significantly expand his forces. We believe he's been siphoning resources and technology from various sources, including some of our own outposts." Quark's eyes widened. "That's a bold and dangerous move. If Xylith has managed to gain access to our own systems and resources, then we're in more trouble than I thought." Jax, the chief engineer, stepped forward. "Captain, I've been running simulations on the Nebula Blaster systems, and I'm not sure she'd be able to hold up against the kind of firepower Xylith is building. We need to upgrade our defenses and weapon systems if we're going to have a chance." Quark nodded, his mind racing. "All right, Jax, I want you and your team to get started on those upgrades as soon as we reach the Starfleet base. Exra, I need you to coordinate with Starfleet intelligence and see if you can gather any additional intel on Xylith's movements and plans." The crew sprang into action, each member focused on their assigned tasks. Quark, however, couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in the pit of his stomach. Xylith was proving to be a more formidable foe than they had ever imagined, and the stakes were higher than ever before. As the Nebula Blaster drew closer to the Starfleet base, Quark knew that they were running out of time. Xylith was making his move, and they needed to be ready to counter him. The future of the entire sector, and perhaps even the Federation itself, hung in the balance. Quark steeled himself, his determination unwavering. "We're not going to let Xylith win," he said, his voice firm. "We'll do whatever it takes to stop him, no matter the cost." The Nebula Blaster continued on its course, its crew working tirelessly to prepare for the inevitable confrontation with their most dangerous adversary yet.
As the Nebula Blaster approached the Starfleet base, Quark and his crew wasted no time in preparing for their next encounter with Xyloth. JAX and the engineering team immediately began work on upgrading the ship's defensive systems and weapons, while XORA coordinated with Starfleet intelligence to gather as much information as possible on Xylith's movements and plans. The intel we've gathered so far is concerning, to say the least, XORA reported, her brow furrowed in concentration. Xyloth has been amassing a massive fleet of ships, far larger than anything we've seen from him before, and it seems he's been stealing technology and resources from our own outposts to bolster his forces. Quark's lips tightened into a grim line. That's exactly what I was afraid of. Xyloth is playing for keeps this time, and we need to be ready to match his firepower. JAX stepped forward, his eyes alight with determination. "We're doing everything we can to upgrade the Nebula Blaster, Captain. Once we're done, she'll be the most formidable ship in the fleet." Quark nodded, his mind racing. "Good, JAX. And XORA, I want you to keep digging for any additional intel we can use to our advantage. We need to know Xylith's every move before he makes it." As the crew set to work, Quark retreated to his ready room, his thoughts consumed by the impending confrontation. He knew that Xyloth was a cunning and ruthless adversary, and that this battle would be their toughest yet. But he also knew that the stakes were too high to back down. Suddenly, a comm signal came in from Starfleet Command. Quark straightened his shoulders and opened the channel. "Captain Quark, this is Admiral Arikea. We've been monitoring the situation, and we're concerned about the threat Xyloth poses to the entire sector. We're prepared to provide you with additional resources and support to help you take him down." Quark felt a surge of relief. "Admiral, that's good news. We're going to need all the help we can get if we're going to stop Xylith's advance." Arikea nodded, his expression grim. "We're sending you a fleet of reinforcements, as well as some of our newest and most advanced ships. We can't let Xyloth gain a foothold in this sector, Quark. The future of the Federation may be at stake." Quark steeled himself, his determination unwavering. "Understood, Admiral. We'll be ready. Xyloth won't know what hit him." As the communication ended, Quark took a deep breath and stepped back out onto the bridge. The Nebula Blaster and her crew were ready for the fight of their lives, and they weren't going to back down without a fight. "All hands prepare for battle," Quark commanded, his voice ringing with authority. We're going to take the fight to Xyloth and show him that the Federation doesn't back down from a challenge." The crew sprang into action, their faces set with grim determination. The stage was set for the ultimate showdown, and Quark knew that the fate of the entire sector rested on their shoulders. As the Nebula Blaster and the Starfleet reinforcements approached the coordinates where Xyloth's fleet was believed to be gathering, the tension on the bridge was palpable. Quark could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins as he scanned the tactical display, his eyes searching for any sign of the enemy. Sora's voice cut through the silence, her tone urgent. "Captain, we're detecting a massive concentration of ships just ahead. It looks like Xyloth has amassed a formidable armada." Quark's jaw tightened. "All right, XORA, patch me through to the rest of the fleet." He waited a moment, then spoke, his voice firm and commanding. "This is Captain Quark of the Nebula Blaster. We're about to engage Xyloth's forces. Remember, our priority is to cripple their ships, not destroy them. We need to try and capture as many of Xyloth's people as possible. They could be valuable sources of information." The crew responded with a chorus of affirmations, and Quark turned to JAX. "How are the Nebula Blaster's systems holding up?" JAX's expression was tense, but there was a glimmer of confidence in his eyes. "The upgrades are complete, Captain. We're ready to give Xyloth everything we've got." Quark nodded, then took a deep breath. "All right then, let's do this." The Starfleet fleet surged forward, their weapons blazing as they engaged Xyloth's ships. The battle was fierce, with both sides exchanging devastating barrages of fire. But the Nebula Blaster and her sister ships were more than a match for Xyloth's forces, their superior firepower and maneuverability proving to be a decisive advantage. As the battle raged on, Quark could see Xyloth's ships beginning to falter. The enemy commander was clearly growing desperate, and Quark knew that this was their chance to turn the tide. "Concentrate all fire on Xyloth's flagship," he ordered, his voice ringing out across the bridge. "We need to take him down before he can regroup." The Nebula Blaster and the other Starfleet vessels poured everything they had into the assault, their weapons hammering away at Xyloth's flagship. Explosions rocked the massive ship, and Quark could see it beginning to list to one side. "We've got him on the run," JAX exclaimed, his eyes alight with triumph. "Just a little more and we'll have him." Quark gripped the arms of his chair, his heart pounding. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. If they could just deliver the final blow, they would finally be able to put an end to Xyloth's reign of terror. As the Nebula Blaster's weapons continued to pummel the enemy flagship, Quark could see the ship beginning to break apart, its hull fracturing under the relentless assault. Xyloth's forces were in disarray, their once formidable fleet now in shambles. "We did it!" XORA cried, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and exhilaration. "Xyloth's flagship is going down." Quark allowed himself a brief smile, but he knew that the battle was far from over. There was still much work to be done, and they couldn't afford to let their guard down. Xyloth was a dangerous adversary, and he wouldn't go down without a fight. "All right, crew," Quark said, his voice calm and steady. "Let's make sure we don't lose any of those ships. We need to capture as many of Xyloth's people as we can. They could be the key to unraveling the rest of his operation." The Nebula Blaster and the rest of the Starfleet fleet surged forward, their sights set on the remaining enemy vessels. The battle was far from over, but Quark knew that they had taken a major step towards finally putting an end to Xyloth's reign of terror.
As the Nebula Blaster and the Starfleet reinforcements closed in on the remaining ships in Xyloth's battered fleet, Quark could feel a sense of cautious optimism settling over the bridge. They had dealt a significant blow to the enemy commander, but he knew that Xyloth was a wily and resourceful foe who would not go down without a fight. "Extra, what's the status of the enemy ships?" Quark asked, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. Zora's fingers danced across her console as she analyzed the incoming data. "It looks like Xyloth's remaining forces are in disarray, Captain. Several of their ships are badly damaged and attempting to retreat, while others are putting up a desperate last stand." Quark nodded, his jaw set with determination. "All right. Let's keep the pressure on. We can't afford to let any of them escape. Jax, ready all weapons and prepare to target the fleeing ships." "Aye, Captain," Jax replied, his hands flying over the controls. "Weapon systems are primed and ready to go." Quark turned to X-ray again. Any sign of Xyloth himself? Zora's brow furrowed as she studied the tactical display. "I'm not detecting his flagship anymore, Captain. It looks like the ship was destroyed during the initial assault." Quark felt a surge of relief, but he also knew that they couldn't afford to let their guard down. Keep searching, Extra. Xylith may have managed to escape in a smaller vessel. We can't let him slip away. As the battle raged on, the Starfleet fleet continued to press their advantage, systematically disabling and capturing the remaining enemy ships. Quark watched with a mixture of pride and tension as his crew carried out their orders with precision and efficiency. Suddenly, a comm signal came in from one of the other Starfleet vessels. Captain Quark, this is Commander Riker. We've captured several of Xylith's lieutenants, including his chief of security. They may be able to provide us with valuable intel on his operations. Quark felt a surge of triumph. Excellent work, Commander. Have your team interrogate them immediately. We need to know everything they can tell us about Xylith's plans and where he might have gone. Understood, Captain, Riker replied. We'll get started right away. As the communication ended, Quark turned to his own crew, his expression grim but determined. All right, everyone, we can't let up now. Xylith is still out there, and we need to find him before he can regroup and strike back. Jax, keep those weapons primed and ready. Extra, continue scanning the area for any sign of the enemy. The Nebula Blaster and the rest of the Starfleet fleet pressed on, their pursuit of Xylith's remaining forces relentless. Quark knew that they were closing in on their target, and he was determined to finish the job once and for all.
As the Nebula Blaster and the Starfleet fleet continued their pursuit of Xylith's remaining forces, Quark could feel the tension on the bridge reaching a fever pitch. They had dealt a devastating blow to the enemy commander's armada, but he knew that Xyloth was still out there, and the hunt was far from over. XORA, any sign of Xylith's trail? Quark asked, his eyes scanning the tactical display. Sora's fingers danced across her console, her brow furrowed in concentration. I'm not picking up any clear indications of his current location, Captain. It's as if he's just vanished. Quark frowned, his mind racing. Xyloth was a cunning and resourceful foe, and he knew that the enemy commander would do everything in his power to evade capture. Keep searching, XORA, Quark said, his voice firm. He can't have gone far. We need to find him before he has a chance to regroup and strike back. As the Nebula Blaster and the rest of the fleet pressed on, Quark couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Xyloth was a dangerous adversary, and he knew that underestimating him could be a fatal mistake. Suddenly, JAX's voice cut through the tense silence on the bridge. Captain, we're detecting a massive energy signature on the edge of the system. It could be a cloaked ship. Quark's heart raced as he leaned forward in his chair. Initiate a full spectrum scan, JAX. I want to know everything about that energy signature. JAX's fingers flew across his console, his face a mask of intense concentration. Scanning now, Captain. It's definitely a ship, and it's powering up some kind of advanced propulsion system. Quark's eyes narrowed as he processed the information. Xyloth, he muttered under his breath. He's trying to make a run for it. Captain, the ship is powering up its weapons systems as well, XORA reported, her voice tense. It looks like they're preparing to engage. Quark's jaw tightened. Alright, everyone, battle stations. JAX, target that ship and prepare to fire. XORA, hail the rest of the fleet and tell them to converge on our position. We can't let Xyloth escape this time. The Nebula Blaster surged forward, its weapons blazing as it closed in on Xylith's cloaked vessel. Quark could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins as he watched the battle unfold, his mind racing with strategies and contingencies. As the Starfleet fleet converged on the scene, Quark knew that this was their best and perhaps only chance to finally put an end to Xylith's reign of terror. The fate of countless innocent lives hung in the balance, and he was determined to do whatever it took to bring the enemy commander to justice. Fire everything we've got, JAX, Quark ordered, his voice ringing with authority. We can't let him get away this time. The Nebula Blaster and the rest of the Starfleet vessels unleashed a devastating barrage of weapons fire, pummeling Xylith's cloaked ship with everything they had. Explosions rocked the vessel, and Quark could see it beginning to falter. We've got him on the run, Captain, XORA exclaimed, her eyes alight with triumph. Quark gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white with tension. Keep pressing the attack, JAX. Don't let up for a second. As the battle raged on, Quark's mind raced with the possibilities. If they could just disable Xylith's ship and capture him, they might finally be able to put an end to this long and grueling conflict. The stakes had never been higher, and he knew that failure was not an option. The battle against Xylith's cloaked vessel raged on, with the Nebula Blaster and the rest of the Starfleet fleet unleashing a relentless barrage of weapons fire. Quark watched with bated breath as explosions rocked the enemy ship, its shields slowly but surely beginning to fail. "Captain, their shields are down to 40%, XORA reported, her fingers flying across her console. "They're taking heavy damage, but they're still fighting back." Quark clenched his jaw, his eyes narrowed in determination. "JAX, keep up the pressure. We can't let them get away this time." JAX's fingers danced across his controls, his face a mask of concentration. "Aye, Captain." Firing all available weapons, the Nebula Blaster's phaser banks and torpedo launchers unleashed a relentless barrage of energy beams and projectiles, hammering away at Xylot's crippled ship. Quark could see the enemy vessel listing to one side, its hull breached in multiple places. Suddenly, a burst of weapons fire lanced out from the enemy ship, striking the Nebula Blaster's shields with a shower of sparks. "Shields down to 60%, XORA shouted, her voice tinged with alarm. "They're not going down without a fight." Quark's jaw tightened, his mind racing. "Evasive maneuvers, JAX. Keep us out of their targeting solutions." XORA, hail the other ships. We need to coordinate our attack. As the Nebula Blaster and the rest of the Starfleet vessels maneuvered to keep Xylot's ship under constant fire, Quark could feel the tension mounting on the bridge. This was a do-or-die moment, and he knew that failure was simply not an option. "Captain, the enemy ship is powering up some kind of emergency warp drive," XORA reported, her voice tight with urgency. "They're trying to make a break for it." Quark's eyes narrowed. "Not this time, Xyloth," he muttered under his breath. "JAX, target their engines. We can't let them get away." The Nebula Blaster and the other Starfleet vessels unleashed a barrage of weapons fire, focusing their attack on the enemy ship's engines. Quark watched with bated breath as the enemy vessel shuddered and groaned under the onslaught, its warp drive systems flickering and failing. Suddenly, the enemy ship's hull split open, and Quark could see escape pods jettisoning from the stricken vessel. "They're abandoning ship!" XORA exclaimed. "The enemy vessel is about to break apart." Quark leaned forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Hail the escape pods, XORA. We need to make sure Xyloth is among them." Sora's fingers danced across her console, her face set in a determined expression. "Hailing the escape pods now, Captain." Quark held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, their best chance to finally capture the elusive Xyloth and bring an end to his reign of terror. As the Starfleet vessels closed in on the escape pods, Quark could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him. The fate of countless innocent lives hung in the balance, and he knew that he had to seize this opportunity, no matter the cost. "There he is!" XORA suddenly exclaimed, her voice triumphant. "We've got Xylot's pod in our sights." Quark's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing with determination. "Tractor beam, JAX. Bring that pod in. We're ending this once and for all." The Nebula Blaster's powerful tractor beam locked onto Xylot's escape pod, pulling it in towards the ship. Quark watched with a mixture of relief and tension as the pod was brought aboard, his fingers tapping nervously on the armrest of his chair. "Captain, the pod is secure," XORA reported, her voice tight with anticipation. "Xyloth is in custody." Quark's shoulders sagged with a sigh of relief. "Excellent work, everyone. JAX, stand down the weapons." XORA, notify the rest of the fleet that we've apprehended Xyloth. It's finally over. As the Nebula Blaster and the Starfleet vessels regrouped, Quark felt a sense of cautious optimism beginning to take hold. They had dealt a devastating blow to Xylot's forces and finally captured the elusive enemy commander. Now, it was time to focus on piecing together the remnants of his empire and ensuring that peace could finally be restored to the region. Quark knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was determined to see it through. With Xyloth in custody, he felt a renewed sense of hope for the future, and he was ready to let his crew into the next chapter of their mission. As the Nebula Blaster and the rest of the Starfleet fleet secured the area around Xylot's crippled vessel, Quark turned his attention to the capture of the notorious enemy commander himself. XORA, what's the status of the escape pod? Quark asked, his voice calm and measured. The pod has been brought aboard and secured in the brig, Captain, XORA replied, her fingers flying across her console. Our security teams are standing by, ready to take Xyloth into custody. Quark nodded, his expression grave. Excellent. I want to be the one to confront him. JAX, you have the bridge. XORA, you're with me. Quark and XORA made their way to the brig, their footsteps echoing in the quiet corridors of the Nebula Blaster. As they approached the holding cell, Quark could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Xyloth, the notorious leader of the Zento Syndicate, sat in the center of the cell, his arms crossed and his expression one of bitter defiance. "So, the great Captain Quark finally manages to catch me," Xyloth sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "I must say, I'm impressed. It took you long enough." Quark stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "Your reign of terror ends here, Xyloth. You've caused too much pain and suffering, and it's time for you to answer for your crimes." Xyloth let out a harsh laugh. "You think you've won, don't you? But this is far from over. The Zento Syndicate will regroup, and will come back stronger than ever. You'll never be able to stop us." Quark's jaw tightened. "We'll see about that. In the meantime, you're going to tell us everything you know about your organization, every base, every resource, every member. The days of the Zento Syndicate are numbered." Xyloth leaned back, a smug grin spreading across his face. "You're wasting your time, Quark. I'm not going to tell you anything. The Syndicate will live on, and we'll be back to finish what we started." Quark's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer to the cell. "I don't think you understand the gravity of your situation, Xyloth. You're facing life in prison, if not worse. But if you cooperate with us, we might be able to work out a deal." Xyloth's expression darkened, and he stood up, his hands gripping the bars of the cell. "I'll never betray the Syndicate. Never. You can torture me, you can kill me, but I'll die before I give up my comrades." Quark sighed, shaking his head. "Very well, Xyloth. Have it your way. XORA, make sure he's secured and under constant surveillance. We'll give him some time to reconsider his position." As Quark and XORA left the brig, Quark couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Xyloth's defiance and determination were unsettling, and he knew that the battle against the Zento Syndicate was far from over. "Captain, do you really think he'll cooperate?" XORA asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Quark's expression was grim. "I don't know, XORA, but we have to try. The lives of countless innocent people are at stake, and we can't afford to let the Syndicate regroup and continue their reign of terror." XORA nodded, her face set with determination. "Then we'll do whatever it takes to stop them, Captain. I'm with you all the way." Quark felt a surge of pride for his crew, and he knew that together, they would face the challenges ahead with unwavering resolve. The battle against the Zento Syndicate was far from over, but Quark was confident that with the combined might of Starfleet, they would emerge victorious.
Quark's confrontation with the notorious Zento Syndicate leader, Xyloth, had left him with a growing sense of unease. The defiant criminal's refusal to cooperate was a troubling sign, and Quark knew that the battle against the Syndicate was far from over. As Quark and Extra made their way back to the bridge, Quark couldn't shake the feeling that Xyloth had something up his sleeve. The Syndicate leader's confidence and determination were unsettling, and Quark couldn't help but wonder what other tricks he might have hidden away. "Jax, status report," Quark said as he stepped onto the bridge. "Sir, the Starfleet fleet has secured the perimeter and we're standing by to receive further orders," Jax replied, his eyes fixed on the view screen. "We've also received a message from Starfleet Command. They want a full report on the situation and our plans for the Zento Syndicate." Quark nodded, his mind racing. "All right, patch me through to Starfleet Command. I'll give them the update personally." As Quark stepped into the briefing room, he took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. He knew that he would need to present a clear and concise plan for dealing with the Syndicate, and he couldn't afford to leave anything out. "Captain Quark, we're glad to hear from you," the Admiral on the other end of the communication said, her expression grave. "We've been tracking the Zento Syndicate for some time, and we're relieved to hear that you've managed to apprehend their leader." Quark nodded. "Thank you, Admiral. We've got Xyloth in custody, but he's refusing to cooperate. We need to find a way to break him and get him to reveal everything he knows about the Syndicate's operations." The Admiral's brow furrowed. "That's concerning. We can't afford to let the Syndicate regroup and continue their criminal activities. Do you have a plan for dealing with this situation?" Quark paused, his mind racing. "Well, Admiral, I was hoping to get your input on this. We're going to need all the resources we can get if we're going to take down the Syndicate once and for all." The Admiral's expression hardened. "I understand, Captain. We'll mobilize additional Starfleet units to assist you, and we'll provide you with any intelligence and resources you need. But time is of the essence. We can't let Xyloth or the Syndicate slip through our fingers." Quark felt a surge of determination. "Understood, Admiral. We'll do whatever it takes to bring the Zento Syndicate down. Quark out. As the communication ended, Quark turned and headed back to the bridge, his mind already worrying with plans and strategies. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was more determined than ever to see this mission through to the end. Jax, assemble the senior staff, Quark said, his voice firm. It's time to start planning your next move against the Zento Syndicate.
Quark's meeting with Starfleet Command had given him a renewed sense of purpose and urgency. The Zento Syndicate could not be allowed to regroup and continue their reign of terror, and Quark was determined to do whatever it took to stop them. As the senior staff assembled in the briefing room, Quark could feel the tension in the air. Everyone knew the gravity of the situation, and they were all ready to do their part. "All right, everyone, listen up," Quark began, his voice commanding. "Starfleet Command has agreed to provide us with additional resources and support to help take down the Zento Syndicate. But we need to move quickly and decisively if we're going to have any chance of success." Quark paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Xylith is refusing to cooperate, which means we'll need to find another way to get the intel we need. Extra, I want you to work with our intelligence team and see if you can dig up any information on the Syndicate's operations and whereabouts." Extra nodded, her expression resolute. "Understood, Captain. I'll get started right away. Jax, I need you to coordinate with the other Starfleet vessels in the area and start planning a series of targeted strikes against known Syndicate strongholds," Quark continued. "We need to disrupt their operations and cut off their supply lines." Jax straightened in his seat. Captain. I'll get the tactical team working on that immediately." Quark turned to the rest of the senior staff. "The rest of you, I want you to start preparing for a potential confrontation with the Syndicate. Make sure our weapons systems are fully operational, our shields are at maximum, and our personnel are ready for anything." The room erupted into a flurry of activity as the senior staff sprung into action, each member of the team focused on their assigned task. Quark watched them with a sense of pride, knowing that he had assembled a crew that was more than capable of rising to the challenge. As the meeting drew to a close, Quark paused, his expression serious. "I know this is going to be a tough fight, but I have complete confidence in all of you. We've faced tough odds before, and we've always come out on top. This time will be no different." The senior staff nodded in agreement, and Quark felt a surge of determination. The Zento Syndicate had no idea what was coming, and Quark was determined to make them pay for their crimes. "All right, let's get to work," Quark said, his voice resolute. "The future of the galaxy is at stake, and we're the only ones who can stop them."
With the senior staff fully briefed and the plans in motion, Quark turned his attention to the pressing matter of Xylith's interrogation. He knew that breaking the notorious Syndicate leader would be no easy task, but he was determined to find a way to get the information they needed. Quark made his way to the brig, where Xylith was being held in a high-security cell. As he approached, he could see the defiant Syndicate leader pacing back and forth. His eyes narrowed with a mixture of anger and defiance. "Xylith," Quark said, his voice calm and measured, "I'm here to talk to you about your cooperation." Xylith's lips curled into a sneer. "Cooperation? Hardly. I've got nothing to say to you, Starfleet lackey." Quark studied the Syndicate leader for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You know, Xylith, the more you resist, the worse it's going to be for you. Starfleet is mobilizing its full resources to take down the Zento Syndicate, and we're not going to stop until we've rooted out every last one of you." Xylith's eyes narrowed. "You really think you can break me, don't you? I faced down worse than you, Quark. I've spent my entire life fighting against the Federation's oppressive rule, and I'm not about to give in now." Quark sighed, his frustration beginning to show. "Look, Xylith, this isn't about the Federation or your personal vendetta. This is about stopping a criminal organization that has caused untold suffering across the galaxy. The sooner you realize that, the better off you'll be." Xylith let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, I realize it all right, but I'm not about to roll over and let you and your precious Starfleet stomp all over me. I've got my own plans, Quark, and you're not going to stop me." Quark felt a surge of anger, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Then I guess we're at an impasse, Xylith. But let me make one thing clear. I will do whatever it takes to stop you and the Zento Syndicate. Even if it means breaking you, you've got one last chance to cooperate, and I suggest you take it." Xylith's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Quark thought he saw a flicker of uncertainty in the Syndicate leader's gaze, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a renewed defiance. "Go to hell, Quark," Silas spat. "You'll never break me." Quark shook his head, his frustration evident. "We'll see about that, Xylith. We'll see." With that, Quark turned and strode out of the brig, his mind already worrying with potential strategies for breaking the Syndicate leader. He knew that time was of the essence, and he couldn't afford to fail. The future of the galaxy was at stake, and he was determined to do whatever it took to stop the Zento Syndicate once and for all.
As Quark left the brig, his mind was racing with strategies and contingency plans. He knew that breaking Xyloth was going to be a major challenge, but he was determined to find a way to get the information they needed to take down the Zento Syndicate. Quark made his way to the ship's main operations center, where the senior staff had gathered to continue their planning. He could see the tension and uncertainty on their faces, and he knew he needed to provide them with a clear path forward. "All right, everyone, listen up," Quark said, his voice commanding. "We've got a lot of work to do, and we need to move quickly if we're going to have any chance of success." The senior staff turned their attention to Quark, and he could see the determination in their eyes. "Xyloth is refusing to cooperate, and we need to find another way to get the information we need," Quark continued. "XORA, I want you to work with our intelligence team and see if you can dig up any other leads on the Syndicate's operations and whereabouts." XORA nodded, her expression resolute. "Understood, Captain. I'll get right on it. JAX, I need you to continue coordinating with the other Starfleet vessels in the area," Quark said, turning to the tactical officer. "We need to keep up the pressure on the Syndicate and disrupt their operations as much as possible." JAX straightened in his seat. Captain, I'll make sure our strikes are as effective as possible." Quark paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "The rest of you, I want you to start preparing for a potential confrontation with the Syndicate. Make sure our weapons systems are fully operational, our shields are at maximum, and our personnel are ready for anything." The room erupted into a flurry of activity as the senior staff sprang into action, each member of the team focused on their assigned task. Quark watched them with a sense of pride, knowing that he had assembled a crew that was more than capable of rising to the challenge. As the meeting drew to a close, Quark turned his attention to the issue of Xylot's interrogation. He knew that traditional methods might not be enough, and he was willing to consider more unconventional approaches. Quark made his way to the ship's medical bay, where he knew he would find the one person who might be able to help him break Xyloth, the ship's chief medical officer, Dr. Alara. "Doctor, I need your help," Quark said, his voice low and urgent. "I've got a plan to break Xyloth, but I'm going to need your assistance." Dr. Alara looked up from her work, her expression calm and professional. "What do you have in mind, Captain?"
Quark leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "I need you to help me develop a drug that can effectively break Xylot's mental defenses. Something that will make him more pliable." Dr. Alara's eyes widened, and for a moment, Quark thought she might refuse. But then her expression hardened, and he knew he had her full support. "I'll get started right away, Captain," Dr. Alara said, her voice firm. "We'll break Xyloth, no matter what it takes." Quark nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's what I was hoping you'd say, Doctor. Let's get to work." With that, Quark turned and strode out of the medical bay, his mind already racing with the possibilities. He knew that the path ahead would be a difficult one, but he was determined to see it through to the end. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and Quark was not about to let the Zento Syndicate win.
Quark's conversation with Dr. Alara had given him a new sense of purpose and determination. He knew that breaking Xyloth was going to be a difficult and potentially controversial task, but he was willing to do whatever it took to stop the Zento Syndicate. As Quark made his way back to the bridge, he could feel the tension in the air. The rest of the senior staff was hard at work, each member of the team focused on their assigned tasks. Quark took a moment to survey the scene, his mind already formulating his next move. "XORA, what have you got?" Quark asked, turning to the ship's first officer. XORA looked up from her console, her expression grave. "Not much, I'm afraid. The Syndicate has been incredibly careful in covering their tracks, but my team is still combing through every available database and intelligence report, looking for any leads we can use." Quark nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. "Keep at it, XORA. We need to find a way to get one step ahead of the Syndicate, and every piece of information we can gather could be crucial." XORA nodded, her expression resolute. "Understood, Captain. We won't stop until we've found what we need." Quark turned his attention to the rest of the bridge crew, his gaze sweeping across the room. JAX, how are the offensive operations going? JAX straightened in his seat, his fingers flying across his console. We've managed to disrupt several syndicate operations in the surrounding systems, Captain, but they're still proving to be a slippery target. We're doing our best to keep the pressure on, but they're always one step ahead of us. Quark frowned, his frustration evident. We need to change that, JAX. I want you to work with the tactical team and come up with a more aggressive strategy. We need to force the syndicate to make a mistake, and then we can pounce. JAX nodded, his expression determined. Captain, I'll get right on it. Quark turned his attention to the rest of the bridge crew, his voice commanding. The rest of you, I want you to keep a close eye on the sensor logs and comm channels. If you see anything out of the ordinary, I want to know about it immediately. The bridge crew nodded in acknowledgement, their fingers flying across their consoles as they set to work. Quark took a deep breath, his mind racing with possibilities. He knew that the path ahead was going to be a difficult one, but he was more determined than ever to see it through. The fate of the galaxy was at stake, and he was not about to let the Zento Syndicate win. As Quark settled into the captain's chair, he could feel the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him. But he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, and he knew that his crew was with him every step of the way.
Quark's plan to break Xyloth's mental defenses was a risky one, but he knew that they had no other choice. The Zento Syndicate had to be stopped, and Xyloth was the key to unraveling their entire operation. As Quark and Dr. Alara worked together to develop the mind-altering drug, the tension on the ship only continued to build. The rest of the senior staff was making steady progress on their assigned tasks, but the knowledge that they were racing against the clock weighed heavily on everyone's minds. "All right, Doctor, I think we've got it," Quark said, his voice low and intense. "This compound should be able to completely break down Xyloth's mental barriers and make him more pliable." Dr. Alara nodded, her expression grim. "I understand your reasoning, Captain, but I want you to know that I have deep reservations about using this kind of technology. It's a slippery slope, and we have to be extremely careful." Quark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, Doctor, and believe me, I don't like it either, but we're running out of options, and the fate of the galaxy is at stake. We have to do whatever it takes to stop the Syndicate." Dr. Alara's eyes narrowed, but she nodded reluctantly. "Very well, Captain. But I want you to know that I'll be monitoring Xyloth's condition closely, and if I see any signs of lasting damage, I'll put a stop to this immediately." Quark nodded, his expression grim. "Understood, Doctor. Let's get this done." With that, Quark and Dr. Alara made their way to the ship's brig, where Xyloth was being held. The Romulan prisoner looked up as they entered, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "What do you want from me now, Quark?" He spat, his voice dripping with contempt. Quark stepped forward, his expression hardening. "We need information, Xyloth, and you're going to give it to us, one way or another." Xyloth's eyes widened as he saw the syringe in Dr. Alara's hand, and he began to struggle against his restraints. "No, you can't do this. I won't tell you anything," he shouted, his voice tinged with fear. Quark nodded to Dr. Alara, and she quickly administered the drug. Xyloth's struggles quickly subsided as the compound took effect, his eyes glazing over as the mental barriers in his mind began to crumble. Quark leaned in, his voice low and intense. "Now, Xyloth, tell me everything you know about the Zento Syndicate, and don't leave anything out." Xyloth's mouth opened, and the information began to flow. Details about the Syndicate's operations, their hideouts, their plans for the future. Quark listened intently, his mind racing as he pieced together the puzzle. As Xyloth's words finally trailed off, Quark turned to Dr. Alara, his expression grim. "We've got what we need, Doctor. Now it's time to put an end to the Zento Syndicate, once and for all."
With the critical information they had extracted from Xyloth, Quark and his crew were now poised to launch a decisive strike against the Zento Syndicate. The stakes had never been higher, but Quark was determined to do whatever it took to stop the Syndicate's sinister plans. As Quark gathered his senior staff on the bridge, the tension in the room was palpable. They had one shot to get this right, and they all knew it. "All right, everyone, listen up," Quark began, his voice firm and authoritative. "Xyloth has given us the location of the Syndicate's main base of operations. It's a heavily fortified installation deep in the Talon Nebula, but we're going to hit them hard and fast." He turned to XORA, his first officer. "XORA, I want you to take a small team and infiltrate the base. Your mission is to gather as much intelligence as you can, disable their defenses, and prepare the way for the rest of us. XORA nodded, her expression resolute. Understood, Captain. We'll get it done. Quark then turned to JAX, his tactical officer. JAX, I want you to assemble a strike team. As soon as XORA's team has established a foothold, I want you to lead the assault and take out the Syndicate's leadership. JAX's eyes narrowed, a gleam of determination in his gaze. You can count on us, Captain. We'll hit them hard and fast. Quark then addressed the rest of the bridge crew. The rest of you, I want you to keep a close eye on the situation and be ready to provide support as needed. We're going to need every bit of firepower and expertise we can muster if we're going to pull this off. As the crew sprang into action, Quark took a moment to steel himself for the battle ahead. He knew that the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and he was determined to succeed, no matter the cost. Alright everyone, let's move out, Quark barked, his voice ringing with authority. And may the gods be with us. With that, the crew sprang into action, the sound of boots pounding against the deck plates echoing through the corridors as they prepared to launch their daring assault.
As Quark's assault team made their way towards the Zento Syndicate's heavily fortified base in the Talon Nebula, the tension on board the ship was palpable. Everyone knew that this was the moment of truth, the one chance they had to finally put an end to the Syndicate's reign of terror. Zora's infiltration team had already secured a foothold within the base, disabling key defenses and laying the groundwork for the main assault. Now it was up to Jax and his strike force to deliver the knockout blow. Alright, listen up, Jax barked, addressing his team as they gathered in the ship's armory. We've got one shot at this, so I want everyone to be on their game. Weapons check, gear up, and get ready to move out on my mark. The strike team snapped to attention, their faces set in grim determination as they double-checked their equipment. Quark watched from the sidelines, his own heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. Captain, we're in position and ready to go, Jax reported, locking eyes with Quark. Just say the word. Quark took a deep breath, then nodded. Do it, Jax. Take them down hard and fast, and may the gods be with you. With that, Jax and his team raced towards the shuttle bay, their weapons at the ready. Quark watched them go, and not a worry in the pit of his stomach. He knew that this was the most dangerous mission they had ever undertaken, and the stakes couldn't be higher. As the shuttle carrying the strike team streaked towards the Syndicate's base, Quark turned to the rest of the bridge crew. Alright, everyone, let's get ready to provide support. I want all systems at full readiness and all hands on alert. This is it. The crew sprang into action, their fingers flying over their consoles as they prepared for the impending battle. Quark took his seat in the center of the bridge, his gaze fixed on the view screen as he waited with bated breath for the first reports from the assault team. The minutes ticked by, filled with the tense silence of anticipation, and then, suddenly, the comm system erupted with a flurry of frantic chatter. Captain, we've made it inside the base. Jax's voice crackled over the channel. But the Syndicate's defenses are even stronger than we expected. We need backup. Now, Quark's expression hardened as he leaned forward in his seat. Understood, Jax. We're on our way. Hold on. And don't give an inch. With that, he turned to his crew, his voice ringing with urgency. All hands, prepare for battle. We're going in. The ship jolted into motion, its engines roaring as it raced towards the Syndicate's lair. Quark gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles turning white with the intensity of his grip. This was it, the moment of truth. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and he was determined to do whatever it took to emerge victorious.
As Quark's ship raced towards the Zento Syndicate's stronghold in the Talon Nebula, the bridge crew sprang into action, their fingers flying across their consoles as they prepared for the impending battle. All hands, battle stations. Quark barked, his voice cutting through the tense atmosphere like a razor. Shields at maximum, weapons systems online and ready. I want every available hand ready to provide support for JAX's team. The crew responded with a flurry of activity, their expressions grim but determined. XORA, Quark's first officer, turned to him, her eyes narrowed in focus. Captain, we're getting sporadic reports from JAX's team. They've managed to infiltrate the base, but the Syndicate's defenses are proving tougher than expected. They're requesting immediate backup. Quark's jaw tightened, his mind racing as he weighed their options. Understood. Helm set a course for the base, maximum warp. I want us there yesterday. XORA, relay a message to JAX, tell him we're on our way and to hold their position at all costs. Aye, Captain, XORA replied, her fingers flying across her console as she relayed the orders. Moments later, the ship lurched forward, its engines straining as it hurtled towards the Syndicate's stronghold. Quark gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles turning white with the intensity of his grip. "Captain, we're approaching the base," the helm officer reported, his voice tense. "Sensors detect heavy syndicate activity. They've mobilized their entire fleet to defend the installation." Quark's eyes narrowed, his mind already formulating a plan of attack. "Helm, take us in close, but maintain a safe distance." "XORA, I want a detailed scan of the base's defenses and the syndicate fleet." "JAX, status report." The comm crackled to life, JAX's voice tinged with strain. "Captain, we've managed to disable some of the base's defenses, but we're heavily outnumbered. The Syndicate's forces are pouring in from all sides. We're holding our position, but I don't know how much longer we can last." Quark's expression hardened, his jaw set with determination. "Hang in there, JAX. We're almost there." "XORA, what's the situation?" Sora's brow furrowed as she studied the data on her console. The base is heavily fortified, with multiple layers of shielding and a formidable array of weapons. The Syndicate fleet is also formidable, with a mix of heavily armored cruisers and fast-moving fighter squadrons. Quark nodded, his mind already racing. "Alright, here's what we're going to do. Helm, take us in close, but keep us out of the Syndicate's main weapons range. XORA, I want you to target the base's shield generators and weapons emplacements. JAX, hold your position as best you can. We're going to hit them with everything we've got." The crew sprang into action, their fingers flying across their consoles as they prepared for the upcoming battle. Quark leaned forward in his chair, his gaze fixed on the view screen as the Syndicate's stronghold loomed ever closer. "This is it, people," he said, his voice low and intense. "Let's show the Syndicate what we're made of. For the good of the galaxy, we can't afford to fail." With that, the ship surged forward, its weapons blazing as it engaged the Syndicate's formidable defenses. The battle had begun, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. As Quark's ship closed in on the Zento Syndicate's heavily fortified base, the tension on the bridge reached a fever pitch. The crew worked furiously to prepare for the impending assault, their faces set with grim determination. Shields at maximum, all weapons systems online and ready to fire, XORA reported, her fingers flying across her console. "The Syndicate fleet is moving to intercept us, Captain. They've launched a full squadron of fighter craft." Quark's jaw tightened as he surveyed the tactical display. "Helm, evasive maneuvers. Weapons, target those fighter squadrons and provide cover for JAX's team. I want a clear path for them to reach the base's main entrance." The ship lurched and rolled as the helmsman executed a series of complex maneuvers, the crew bracing themselves against the sudden accelerations. Quark's eyes narrowed as he watched the Syndicate fighters converge on their position, their weapons blazing. "Return, fire, all batteries," he barked, his voice sharp and commanding. "We need to buy JAX enough time to reach the base." The ship's weapons systems roared to life, unleashing a barrage of energy bolts and missile strikes that tore through the enemy formation. Quark watched intently as the fighter craft scattered, some of them succumbing to the relentless assault. "Captain, we've managed to secure a temporary opening," XORA announced, her voice tinged with relief. "JAX's team is moving towards the base's entrance, but the Syndicate's main fleet is closing in fast. We can't hold them off for long." Quark nodded, his mind racing. "Understood. Helm, maintain our current position and continue providing cover fire. XORA, target the base's shield generators and weapons emplacements. I want those defenses down before the Syndicate's main fleet arrives." The ship shuddered as it exchanged fire with the Syndicate's formidable warships, its shields straining under the barrage of enemy weapons. Quark gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles turning white as he watched the unfolding battle. "Captain, the shield generators are down." Sora's voice rang out, a hint of triumph in her tone. "We've also managed to disable a significant portion of the base's weapons systems. JAX's team is reporting they've reached the main entrance and are preparing to breach." Quark exhaled a tense breath, his eyes narrowing. "Excellent work, XORA. JAX, do you copy? The base is vulnerable. Go in hard and fast. We'll provide cover fire from out here." The comm crackled to life, JAX's voice tinged with determination. "Copy that, Captain. We're moving in. May the gods be with us." With that, the strike team surged forward, their weapons blazing as they stormed the Syndicate's inner sanctum. Quark watched the feed from their helmet cameras, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The battle raged on, the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. Quark knew that this was the moment they had been preparing for, a chance to finally bring the Zento Syndicate to its knees and restore peace to the galaxy. But the outcome was far from certain, and the stakes couldn't be higher. As the fighting intensified, Quark steeled himself for the long and grueling battle that lay ahead. This was no time for hesitation or doubt. It was time to fight with everything they had, and to emerge victorious no matter the cost. As the battle raged on, Quark and his crew continued their relentless assault on the Zento Syndicate's defenses. The ship's shields strained under the barrage of enemy fire, but the crew remained focused and determined. Shields at 60% and holding, XORA reported, her brow furrowed in concentration. We've managed to take out several of the Syndicate's capital ships, but they just keep coming. Quark's eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical display. Keep up the pressure, XORA. We need to buy JAX's team as much time as possible to get inside and disable the base's primary systems. On the surface of the Syndicate stronghold, JAX and his strike team had breached the main entrance and were fighting their way through the heavily fortified corridors. Plasma bolts ricocheted off the walls as they engaged the Syndicate's heavily armed security forces. "We're taking heavy fire," JAX shouted into his comm, his voice barely audible over the sound of the fighting. "These bastards are putting up one hell of a fight. We're almost to the central control room, but I don't know how much longer we can hold out." Quark's jaw tightened as he listened to the report. "Hang in there, JAX. We're doing everything we can to keep the heat off you. Just focus on getting to that control room and disabling the base's systems." Back on the bridge, the crew continued their relentless assault, their fingers flying across their consoles as they directed the ship's firepower. "Captain, the Syndicate's fleet is starting to fall back," XORA reported, a hint of relief in her voice. "It looks like they're concentrating their efforts on defending the base itself." Quark nodded, his expression grim. "Good. That means JAX's team is making progress. Keep up the pressure, XORA. I want those defenses down to the bare minimum." The ship shuddered as it weathered another barrage of enemy fire, but the crew remained undaunted. Quark gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles turning white as he watched the battle unfold. Suddenly, a burst of static crackled over the comm, followed by JAX's voice, triumphant and strained. "Captain, we've done it. We've breached the central control room and disabled the base's primary systems. The Syndicate's defenses are crumbling." Quark couldn't suppress a grin as he heard the news. "Well done, JAX. Get your team out of there as quickly as you can. XORA, signal the rest of the fleet. It's time to finish this." The ship surged forward, its weapons blazing with renewed vigor, as the Syndicate's defenses crumbled under the relentless assault. Quark watched with satisfaction as the enemy vessels began to retreat, their commanders realizing that the battle was lost. "Captain, the Syndicate's forces are in full retreat," XORA reported, her voice tinged with relief. "JAX's team is reporting that they've made it out of the base safely." Quark exhaled a tense breath, a smile spreading across his face. "Excellent work, everyone. This is a victory not just for us, but for the entire galaxy. Let's make sure the Syndicate knows they'll never be able to threaten us again." With that, the ship pressed on, its crew determined to ensure that the Zento Syndicate would never again rise to power. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over, and Quark and his crew knew that they would be at the forefront of the fight for the future of the galaxy.
As the battle drew to a close, Quark and his crew began the delicate task of securing the Zento Syndicate's former stronghold. The once impenetrable base now lay in ruins, its defenses shattered by the relentless assault. "Captain, we're starting to receive distress signals from across the sector," XORA reported, her fingers flying across her console. "It seems the Syndicate's forces are in complete disarray. Their ships are surrendering or fleeing the system." Quark nodded, a spark of triumph in his eyes. "Excellent work, XORA. Send out the coordinates of the base to our allies. We need to secure this place and make sure the Syndicate can never regroup." The ship's landing parties began to fan out across the base, carefully scouring the complex for any remaining pockets of resistance. Quark watched the progress on the tactical display, his mind already racing ahead to the next steps. "Jax, what's the situation on the ground?" he asked. His voice calm and measured, the comm crackled to life, and Jax's voice came through, tinged with a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. "We've secured the central control room and the main hangar bays, Captain. The Syndicate's forces are in full retreat, and we've already started cataloging their equipment and data stores. Good work, Jax. Quark replied. Start processing that intel and see if you can piece together the Syndicate's plans and any potential future threats. I want a full report as soon as possible. As the crew worked tirelessly to secure the base, Quark turned his attention to the larger strategic picture. The Zendo Syndicate had been a formidable enemy, with its tentacles reaching deep into the galactic underworld. Their defeat would send shockwaves through the criminal networks that had long relied on their protection and resources. Extra, contact our allies in the Galactic Alliance, Quark said, his voice firm. Let them know that we've secured the Syndicate's base and that we'll be sending them a comprehensive intelligence report. We need to coordinate our efforts to ensure that the Syndicate's remaining forces are permanently dismantled. Extra nodded, her fingers already flying across her console. Understood, Captain. I'll also notify the local security forces to start sweeping the surrounding systems for any Syndicate stragglers. Quark leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. The battle may have been won, but he knew that the war was far from over. The Syndicate had been a powerful and resourceful enemy, and he couldn't shake the feeling that their defeat would only embolden other criminal organizations to fill the power vacuum. This is just the beginning, he murmured, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. We need to be vigilant and prepared for whatever comes next. As the crew continued their work, Quark knew that the path ahead would be arduous and fraught with challenges, but he was determined to see this through, no matter the cost. The galaxy had been held hostage by the Zento Syndicate for far too long, and it was time to usher in a new era of peace and stability. As the dust settled on the Zento Syndicate's former stronghold, Quark and his crew began the meticulous process of cataloging the captured intelligence and resources. The sheer scale of the Syndicate's operations was staggering, and the data they uncovered would prove crucial in unraveling the organization's vast network of criminal enterprises. Captain, the data processing teams had been working around the clock, Extra reported, her voice tinged with a mix of exhaustion and excitement. We've managed to decrypt and cross-reference a significant portion of the Syndicate's records. The information we've uncovered is nothing short of astounding. Quark nodded, his expression grim. I suspected as much. The Zendo Syndicate had its tentacles in every corner of the galaxy. Their reach was far more extensive than we ever imagined. Jax, who had been leading the ground operations, joined them on the bridge, his uniform still bearing the scars of the recent battle. Captain, the equipment and resources we've secured from the base are also staggering. We're talking about enough firepower and technology to equip an entire fleet. Quark's brow furrowed as he contemplated the implications. This is both a blessing and a curse, Jax. On one hand, it denies the Syndicate the use of these assets. On the other, we now have the responsibility of securing and distributing these resources in a way that doesn't destabilize the delicate balance of power in the galaxy. Extra nodded in agreement. Exactly. We need to tread carefully here. The Galactic Alliance will undoubtedly want to get their hands on as much of this as possible, but we need to ensure that it's done in a way that doesn't create new power imbalances or fuel further conflict. Quark's gaze hardened as he considered the challenges ahead. Then we'll have to work closely with the Alliance and other key players to develop a comprehensive plan for the distribution and safeguarding of these assets. We can't afford to let this kind of power fall into the wrong hands. The crew understood the gravity of the situation. The defeat of the Zento Syndicate had left a significant power vacuum, and there were no shortage of factions and organizations vying to fill that void. Quark knew that their work was far from over, and that the coming months would be a delicate and dangerous balancing act. Assemble the senior staff, he said, his voice firm. We need to start planning our next moves. The fate of the galaxy may very well rest on the decisions we make in the days and weeks to come. As the crew hurried to carry out his orders, Quark took one last look at the tactical display. His eyes narrowed in determination. The Zento Syndicate may have been defeated, but the true battle for the future of the galaxy was only just beginning.
With the Zento Syndicate's stronghold secured and the vast trove of intelligence and resources under their control, Quark and his crew knew that the next steps would be crucial in shaping the future of the galaxy. Gathered in the ship's briefing room, the senior staff listened intently as Quark outlined his proposed strategy. The data we've recovered from the Syndicate's systems is truly staggering, he began, his gaze sweeping across the room. It details the full extent of their criminal operations, their key collaborators, and their plans for the future. Extra, the ship's executive officer, nodded grimly. We've already started cross-referencing the intel with Galactic Alliance databases. The connections we're uncovering are deeply troubling. It seems the Syndicate had infiltrated the upper echelons of power, compromising politicians, military leaders, and even members of the Council. Jax, the ground operations commander, leaned forward, his expression grim. And the equipment and tech we've recovered is no less concerning. We're talking about enough firepower to equip a small fleet, not to mention advanced surveillance and communications systems that could be used to destabilize entire star systems. Quark held up a hand, silencing the murmurs that had begun to circulate around the room. I understand the gravity of the situation, but we can't afford to be paralyzed by fear. We need to act, and we need to act quickly. He paused, his gaze hardening. The Galactic Alliance has already been informed of our findings, and they're eager to work with us to dismantle the Syndicate's remaining elements. However, we need to be cautious. There's no telling how deep the Syndicate's tentacles have reached or who else might be vying to fill the power vacuum. Exra nodded, her fingers flying across her data pad. We've already compiled a list of priority targets and coordinated with Alliance forces to begin sweeping the surrounding systems. But we'll need to move carefully, lest we inadvertently trigger a wider conflict. Quark's expression grew pensive. That's where the next phase of our plan comes in. We need to work with the Alliance to develop a comprehensive intelligence gathering and distribution network, one that can help us identify and neutralize the Syndicate's remaining elements without tipping our hand. He paused, meeting the gaze of each of his senior staff in turn. And we need to be prepared for the possibility that the Syndicate's defeat may embolden other factions to make a play for power. We can't afford to let our guard down, not for a second. The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. Quark knew that the path ahead would be fraught with peril, but he was determined to see this through, no matter the cost. "We've come this far," he said, his voice resolute. "Now, let's finish the job and make sure the Xentos Syndicate can never rise again."
With the Xentos Syndicate's defeat, Quark and his crew knew that the true challenge was only just beginning. The vast trove of intelligence and resources they had secured from the Syndicate's stronghold had opened a Pandora's box, revealing the startling depth of the organization's infiltration into the upper echelons of power. Across the galaxy, Quark convened a critical meeting with his senior staff, outlining the complex web of alliances and loyalties they would need to navigate in the coming months. The data we've recovered shows that the Syndicate had compromised key figures within the Galactic Alliance, including military commanders and even members of the Council, Quark said, his brow furrowed with concern. "We can't trust that the information we share will remain secure, or that our actions won't be undermined from within." Extra, the executive officer, nodded grimly. "We've already cross-referenced the intel with our own sources, and the connections are deeply troubling. It seems the Syndicate had its fingers in every corner of the galaxy: politics, commerce, even the black market." Jax, the ground operations commander, leaned forward, his expression grim. "And the resources we've captured? They're a double-edged sword. On one hand, they deny the Syndicate the use of that firepower and technology, but on the other, it creates a power vacuum that could be filled by any number of factions, each vying for a piece of the pie." Quark acknowledged the valid concerns with a solemn nod. "Precisely. We need to tread carefully, lest our actions inadvertently destabilize the delicate balance of power in the galaxy." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "That's why we need to work closely with the Galactic Alliance, but in a way that limits the number of people who know the full extent of what we've uncovered. We need to build a comprehensive intelligence gathering and distribution network, one that can help us identify and neutralize the Syndicate's remaining elements without tipping our hand." Zora's fingers danced across her datapad as she outlined the proposed plan. "We've already started coordinating with select Alliance contacts, establishing a secure communication network and developing a strategy for the controlled distribution of the captured resources. The goal is to empower the Alliance to dismantle the Syndicate's operations, while maintaining a level of oversight and influence to ensure the balance of power is maintained." Jax nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's a delicate dance, but necessary if we want to prevent the galaxy from descending into chaos. The Syndicate's defeat may have left a power vacuum, but we can't allow that vacuum to be filled by forces even more dangerous."
Quark's gaze hardened with determination. "Exactly. We've come too far to let everything we've fought for slip through our fingers. We'll work with the Alliance, but we'll do it on our own terms. The future of the galaxy depends on it." As the meeting adjourned, Quark couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The true battle had only just begun, and the stakes had never been higher.
With the Xentos Syndicate's defeat and the vast trove of intelligence and resources now in their hands, Quark and his crew found themselves navigating an increasingly complex and treacherous political landscape. The data they had uncovered painted a disturbing picture. The Syndicate's tentacles had reached deep into the upper echelons of power across the galaxy, compromising politicians, military leaders, and even members of the Galactic Alliance Council. Quark knew that simply handing over the intel to the Alliance would be a risky proposition. There was no telling how far the Syndicate's infiltration had spread, or who among the Alliance's leadership might be working to undermine their efforts. "We can't trust the information we share will remain secure," Quark warned his senior staff during a tense meeting. "We need to be extremely careful about how we proceed, or we risk inadvertently destabilizing the entire galactic order." Exera, the executive officer, nodded grimly. "The data we've compiled shows the Syndicate had its fingers in every corner of the galaxy, politics, commerce, even the black market. Dismantling their network without creating a wider power vacuum is going to be a delicate and dangerous undertaking." Jax, the ground operations commander, leaned forward, his expression grim. "And the resources we've captured, the firepower, the advanced tech, the surveillance and communications systems, they're a double-edged sword. They deny the Syndicate the use of those assets, but they also create a power vacuum that others will inevitably try to fill." Quark acknowledged the valid concerns with a solemn nod. "Precisely. We need to work closely with the Alliance, but in a way that limits the number of people who know the full extent of what we've uncovered. We need to build a comprehensive intelligence gathering and distribution network, one that can help us identify and neutralize the Syndicate's remaining elements without tipping our hand." Zora's fingers danced across her data pad as she outlined the proposed plan. "We've already started coordinating with select Alliance contacts, establishing a secure communication network and developing a strategy for the controlled distribution of the captured resources. The goal is to empower the Alliance to dismantle the Syndicate's operations while maintaining a level of oversight and influence to ensure the balance of power is maintained." Jax nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's a delicate dance, but necessary if we want to prevent the galaxy from descending into chaos. The Syndicate's defeat may have left a power vacuum, but we can't allow that vacuum to be filled by forces even more dangerous."
Quark's gaze hardened with determination. "Exactly. We've come too far to let everything we've fought for slip through our fingers. We'll work with the Alliance, but we'll do it on our own terms. The future of the galaxy depends on it." As the meeting adjourned, Quark couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The true battle had only just begun, and the stakes had never been higher. As Quark and his crew delved deeper into the intelligence they had captured from the Xentos Syndicate's stronghold, the scale and complexity of the organization's infiltration into the highest levels of power across the galaxy became increasingly apparent. The data they had uncovered painted a disturbing picture. The Syndicate's tentacles had reached into the very heart of the Galactic Alliance, compromising politicians, military leaders, and even members of the Council itself. "We can't trust that the information we share will remain secure," Quark warned his senior staff during a tense meeting. "There's no telling how far the Syndicate's influence has spread, or who among the Alliance's leadership might be working to undermine our efforts." XORA, the executive officer, nodded grimly. "The connections we've uncovered are deeply troubling. The Syndicate had its fingers in everything: politics, commerce, even the black market. Dismantling their network without creating a wider power vacuum is going to be an immense challenge." JAX, the ground operations commander, leaned forward, his expression grim. "And the resources we've captured, the firepower, the advanced tech, the surveillance and communications systems, they're a double-edged sword. They deny the Syndicate the use of those assets, but they also create a power vacuum that others will inevitably try to fill." Quark acknowledged the valid concerns with a solemn nod. "Precisely. We need to work closely with the Alliance, but in a way that limits the number of people who know the full extent of what we've uncovered. We need to build a comprehensive intelligence gathering and distribution network, one that can help us identify and neutralize the Syndicate's remaining elements without tipping our hand." Sora's fingers danced across her datapad as she outlined the proposed plan. We've already started coordinating with select alliance contacts, establishing a secure communication network and developing a strategy for the controlled distribution of the captured resources. The goal is to empower the alliance to dismantle the syndicate's operations, while maintaining a level of oversight and influence to ensure the balance of power is maintained. JAX nodded, his expression thoughtful. It's a delicate dance, but necessary if we want to prevent the galaxy from descending into chaos. The Syndicate's defeat may have left a power vacuum, but we can't allow that vacuum to be filled by forces even more dangerous. Quark's gaze hardened with determination. Exactly. We've come too far to let everything we've fought for slip through our fingers. We'll work with the Alliance, but we'll do it on our own terms. The future of the galaxy depends on it. As the meeting adjourned, Quark couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The true battle had only just begun, and the stakes had never been higher.
Quark and his crew continued to meticulously unravel the Zento Syndicate's vast web of corruption and infiltration, uncovering ever more disturbing revelations. The scale of the Syndicate's influence is truly staggering, Exra reported, her expression grave. They've managed to compromise key figures not just in the Galactic Alliance, but in virtually every major power structure across the galaxy: the Krellian hegemony, the Dracon Empire, the Mercantile Guild, even the Interstellar Commerce Directorate. Jax, the ground operations commander, leaned forward, his brow furrowed, and the resources they've amassed, the advanced technology, the sophisticated surveillance and communications networks, the stockpiles of weapons and military-grade hardware are now in our hands. It's a double-edged sword, though. We can use these assets against the Syndicate, but we have to be incredibly careful not to upset the delicate balance of power. Quark's lips pressed into a thin line as he pored over the data. The Syndicate has been playing a long game, manipulating events and positioning their assets for decades. Dismantling their network without triggering a galaxy-wide conflict is going to require the utmost precision and finesse. We've already begun working with a select group of trusted Alliance contacts, Extra said, but we have to be extremely cautious about who we bring into the loop. There's no telling how deeply the Syndicate's influence has penetrated the Alliance's leadership. Jax nodded grimly, and we can't afford to let these resources fall into the wrong hands. If the wrong factions or criminal organizations get their hands on this technology, it could upset the balance of power in ways we can't even begin to imagine. Quark's expression hardened with determination. Then we need to establish our own independent intelligence network, one that can operate outside the constraints of the Alliance but in close coordination with our trusted assets. We have to be several steps ahead of the Syndicate's remaining elements, anticipating their moves and neutralizing their threats before they can destabilize the entire galaxy. Zora's fingers danced across her datapad, outlining a comprehensive plan. I've already started recruiting and vetting a network of covert operatives, both within the Alliance and outside of it. We'll use the Syndicate's own intelligence-gathering capabilities against them, feeding them misinformation and drawing them into traps. Jax leaned back in his chair, brow furrowed in thought. It's a risky gambit, but we don't have much choice. The Syndicate's defeat may have created a power vacuum, but we can't let that vacuum be filled by forces even more dangerous. The fate of the galaxy hangs in the balance. Quark's gaze hardened with an unwavering resolve. Then we'd better not fail. The work ahead of us will be treacherous, but we've come too far to back down now. We'll do whatever it takes to ensure the Syndicate's influence is eradicated for good, even if it means operating outside the confines of the Alliance. As the meeting adjourned, Quark couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that had been weighing on him. The true battle had only just begun, and the stakes had never been higher. The team's efforts to unravel the Zento Syndicate's vast network of corruption and influence continued to yield unsettling discoveries. The scope of the Syndicate's reach is truly mind-boggling, Exra said, her brow furrowed with concern. We've traced their tentacles to the highest levels of power across the galaxy: the Galactic Alliance, the Krellian hegemony, the Dracon Empire, even the Interstellar Commerce Directorate. They've managed to embed their operatives and assets at critical nodes throughout the power structure. Jax, the seasoned ground operations commander, leaned forward in his chair, his expression grim. And the resources they've amassed are staggering: advanced technology, sophisticated surveillance and communications networks, stockpiles of military-grade hardware. It's a veritable arsenal that could destabilize the entire galactic order if it falls into the wrong hands. Quark's jaw tensed as he pored over the reams of data. The Syndicate has been playing a long, patient game, manipulating events and positioning their assets for decades. Dismantling this network without triggering a catastrophic power struggle is going to require the utmost precision and finesse. We've established tentative connections with a select group of trusted Alliance contacts, X-Ray explained, but we have to be incredibly cautious about who we bring into the loop. There's no telling how deeply the Syndicate's influence has penetrated the Alliance's leadership. Jax's brow furrowed with concern, and we can't afford to let these resources fall into the hands of the wrong factions or criminal organizations. If the balance of power shifts too drastically, the consequences could be incalculable. Quark's expression hardened with determination. Then we need to build our own independent intelligence network, one that can operate outside the constraints of the Alliance but in close coordination with our trusted assets. We have to be several steps ahead of the Syndicate's remaining elements, anticipating their moves and neutralizing their threats before they can destabilize the entire galaxy. Zora's fingers dance across her datapad, outlining a comprehensive plan. I've already begun recruiting and vetting a network of covert operatives, both within the Alliance and beyond its borders. We'll use the Syndicate's own intelligence-gathering capabilities against them, feeding them misinformation and luring them into traps. Jax leaned back in his chair, brow furrowed in thought. It's a risky gambit, but we don't have much choice. The power vacuum left by the Syndicate's defeat could be filled by forces even more dangerous. The fate of the galaxy hangs in the balance.
Quark's gaze burned with an unwavering resolve. Then we'd better not fail. The work ahead will be treacherous, but we've come too far to back down now. We'll do whatever it takes to ensure the Syndicate's influence is eradicated for good, even if it means operating outside the confines of the Alliance. As the meeting concluded, Quark couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that had been weighing on him. The true battle had only just begun, and the stakes had never been higher.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more exciting content like this. Until the next episode.